Hi, this is Miranda from the Wayne Public Library, and today we'll be talking about our sourdough starters. So to get started, sourdough starter is really the key ingredient to baking sourdough bread, and the kit that you picked up from the library will only be covering the starter itself and not a bread recipe. Essentially, a sourdough starter is going to be the yeast that you would use in a homemade bread to get the rise from your loaf. The kit that you picked up from the library should include a package of Bob's Red Mill dark rye flour, as well as about 3 cups of an unbleached white all-purpose flour. You will use that as well as some water and just to create your starter. What you will need to bring to this is some water. I use tap water, but I let it sit out for about 24 hours just to let it air out a bit. Or you could use bottled water, which is easier but more expensive. You'll also need a vessel, so like a jar or something like that. If you do something with a jar, don't use a lid that's airtight, because the starter will create air bubbles and it can create too much pressure inside the jar. And then all of the measurements will be given both in weight, which is a bit more, will be given in weight, which is more accurate, which is what I use with my starter at home, as well as estimates in cups, mostly cups. Some things like water is easiest to measure in milliliters, just because like 100 grams of water is 100 milliliters and you're set with that. Each kit will include directions and 10 days worth of flour to not only make your starter, but to maintain it for like those first 10 days. After those first 10 days, you're free to start refrigerating it and only feeding it like once a week or so. And then you'll want to feed it like the day before you would ever use it to make bread. But the starter actually isn't ready for bread baking for generally at least 10 days to 2 weeks. I normally give mine like a couple extra weeks just to make sure it's nice and mature to get the sort of rise that I want out of my bread. A couple notes about measurement is, if you are measuring by weight, you want to make sure that you weigh your jar or whatever you're using to keep your starter in first. Another thing is that the cups measurement is going to be an estimate. Because this is one of the oldest ways to make bread, they did this, well before we had kitchen scales or measuring cups. So estimates are totally fine. Just use your best judgment, and if you happen to miss a day, just do the next feeding the following day. Don't try to account for the feeding that you missed. Just go every day, and it'll work out. So on the first day, you'll want to mix 100 grams or about 2/3 cup of the rye flour and about 150 grams of water, or about 150 milliliters of water. And then you just mix it up, put it in your jar, and then you just leave it for 24 hours, and that's it. You want to make sure you mix it to where there's no clumps. And if you want, it's sort of interesting, you can keep an eye on it, and as you continue maintaining the starter, you can sort of see it react to all of the additions that you make. Now on day 2, you'll want to take about 50 grams of the starter, or probably about 1/3 cup of the starter, and you'll want to mix that with 50 grams of rye flour, or about 1/3 cup, and about 50 grams of the all-purpose flour, again about 1/3 cup. And then in addition, you'll want to add the 100 grams or 100 milliliters of water. When you're adding your flour, no matter what combination of flours you use, you want to make sure that your flour to water ratio is pretty even. If it's too thick, you can always add a little bit more, but if it's too wet, you don't really have to adjust it or worry about it. You just want to make sure that you're able to stir it and stir the starter into the mixture and sort of incorporate it evenly. Day 3 is going to be the same as day 2, with 50 grams starter, 50 grams rye, 50 grams all-purpose, and 100 grams of water. On day 4 is very similar, and day 4 measurements are going to be the same measurements that you use going forward for just as long as you're going to continue maintaining your starter on a day-to-day basis, and that's going to be 25-gram starter. So about a sixth of a cup. You just, a couple tablespoons is really all you need. And then 50 grams of rye, 50 grams of all-purpose, and then 100 grams of water. You'll want to continue using these measurements every day until your starter is mature, and you'll be able to tell it's mature once it's full of bubbles. It looks active. It looks like something that you should probably be eating, honestly. But that's just the natural way that it occurs. And then after that, you can start refrigerating it. And then you can refrigerate it and then just like feed it like once a week or so, let it sit overnight, and then put it back in the refrigerator just to freshen it up a bit. So even though the directions are really easy and it's just add flour and water and mix, and add flour, water, and starter and mix, I just figured I'd show you a quick example. First, in this measuring spoon, that measuring cup is a quarter cup, and that's what 25 grams of starter looks like, or what my starter looks like, because everyone's starter is a little bit different. So there is the 25 grams of starter in the bowl. So again, it was only like half of this, so close to about an eighth of a cup. A little bit more than that. So there's the starter, and then we will add our 50 grams of all-purpose flour, and then our 50 grams of our rye flour. And then over here, we will go in and we will add our 100 grams of water. And then mix. So this is my starter all mixed up, and it just looks like a bunch of sludge, but this is sort of the yeast you would use for a sourdough bread recipe. So you can just keep maintaining this, and then you will always have yeast available to you. Have a great day, and I hope to see you at the library.